Okay, we are on chapter 3 of The War I Finally Won, and this is a book that my class has been reading, and we are going to do it on our YouTube account since we don't have time to completely finish it by the end of the year. So we just found out that Mam has died, and Ada is in the hospital recovering after her foot surgery. Chapter 3. At least when Mam locked me up, I'd been able to move around the room. Now I was trapped in a hospital bed, helpless, immobile, away from Jamie and Butter. I wouldn't have Butter if I had to leave Susan. Susan didn't love Butter the way I did. He was left over from Becky. Maybe Susan would let me borrow Butter if I ended up somewhere I could keep a pony. I was the one who took care of him. I put my hands over my face. Tears soaked my pillow. I tried not to make any noise. Probably Jamie could keep his cat. Breville was a good mouser. Even Mam might have let Jamie have a cat. I'm that sorry about your mother, one of the younger nurses whispered. She pulled my blankets over my shoulders. I didn't reply. Susan had tried to teach me manners, but I didn't know the manners for when people said they were sorry. Your horrible mother died. Is your father in the army? The nurse asked. I shook my head. He's dead, I whispered. A long time ago. Nothing to do with the war, I said. We're orphans now. The nurse looked stricken. You poor dear. I rolled over to face the wall. What happened to orphans? I asked her. Where do orphans live? In orphanage, I suppose, the nurse said. But surely your aunt... She isn't our aunt, I said. When Susan returned that afternoon, I pretended to be asleep. When she came back after tea time, she brought Jamie. She brought our book, too, The Swiss Family Robinson. The only book we had left. It had been inside our Anderson shelter when the bomb fell on our house. Nice to know the shelter saved something. Susan opened to the beginning. For many days, she read, we had been tempest-tossed. No, I covered my ears with my hands. Please, I don't want... The Swiss Family Robinson got shipwrecked onto a beautiful island where everything turned out splendid for them. Jamie loved the story. I had always disliked it. I hated it now. Jamie and I were shipwrecked, but we hadn't been rescued after all. We hadn't reached an island. We were still struggling not to drown in the storm-tossed sea. Susan closed the book. I held on to Jamie and wept. Days passed without arrangements. I asked the young nurse about orphanages. Oh, she said, her face clouding. I'm sure some of them are nice places nowadays. Nothing like how they used to be. I mean, you get enough to eat and all. Nobody starves. Could I keep a pony? I asked. I wouldn't know about that, she said, which meant no. Every day, doctors poked and prodded my leg. They changed my cast for another cast that looked exactly the same as the first one. They wouldn't let me have crutches. They refused to let me out of the bed. Susan visited every morning, her face gentle and sympathetic. She brought Jamie to see me every afternoon as soon as he got out of school. When we came to live with Susan, she gave me crutches. When Mam came back for us, she threw them away. That's how Jamie and I got caught outside in the London air raid. I couldn't move fast enough to find a shelter before the bombs came. We'd been on the street, cowering under the hail of bricks and glass. A night nurse shook me awake. You're screaming, she said. Stop. I was shaking and drenched in sweat. Bombs, I said. A wall fell on my leg. I couldn't move. It was a nightmare, the nurse said. Pull yourself together. You're frightening the younger ones. The nurse walked away. I stared at the ceiling. My heart raced. I had to pee, which meant calling a nurse and using a bedpan, which reminded me of Ma'am making me use the bucket in our old flat. I knew where the toilet was. I'd used it before my surgery. The ward was dark, but some light shone from the nurse's station in the hall. I sat up. I pulled the blankets and sheets away. I tapped the hard plaster of my cast. My foot scarcely hurt at all. I swung my legs around to the ground. It would have been easier with crutches, but there were beds every few feet along the room. I steadied myself on the bed rails and dragged my cast across the floor. It was hard work, but I was so glad to be moving. I slid into the bathroom, used the toilet, and came out. I was halfway back down the darkened ward when a voice behind me barked. What on earth are you doing? I jumped, startled. I lost my balance. I waved my arms in the air, fell against the nearest bed, and whacked its sleeping occupant, a small girl with a broken leg in traction. She screamed. I pushed myself sideways and fell. My right knee twisted. Pain shot through my ankle. I screamed, too. The whole ward woke, and a ward is like the whole hospital floor. Someone flung on the lights. A pair of nurses hoisted me back into my own bed. Others calmed and comforted the little girl. As if you weren't old enough to know better, the head nurse hissed. Waking everyone up with your ruckus and taking such ridiculous risks. You'll be lucky if you haven't hurt your recovery. Wait until your mother hears. She's not my mother. The head nurse didn't care. In the morning, the doctor said I didn't seem to have done myself any harm from the fall the night before. The nurse told Susan anyway. Susan wasn't happy. I don't know what got into her, the nurse said. I do, Susan replied. To me, she said more softly, I know it's difficult, but you must rest until you heal. If you get up again, they'll tie you to the bed. I shuddered. Then I saw what Susan was carrying. You've got another letter from Lady Thornton. My stomach lurched. Here came the arrangements. Susan waited until the nurse walked away. Then she sat down on my bed. She looked unhappy. I'm afraid it's hard news, she said. I've been trying to think of a way to say this gently, but I haven't found one. She reached for my hand. I pulled it back. I thought I might stop breathing. I had to stay with Jamie. I had to. Your mother was cremated, Susan said. It was because of the war, because there were so many victims at the factory, and because we didn't hear about her death in time to claim her body. Her ashes were put into a mass grave. We won't be able to have a funeral. We won't be able to bury her in London or in our village. I am so sorry. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Ada? Susan asked. Are you okay? I didn't know where to begin. The word funeral, cremated, her ashes, someone was cleaning out Ma'am's grate. What did any of it mean? But I do have a bit of good news, Susan continued. Lady Thornton offered us the use of a cottage on her estate to live in. She says it's quite small, but it's mostly furnished. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what we were going to do. Susan said, the government will pay me damages for Becky's house, but they say it might take years. I haven't been able to find anything for rent in the village. She looked at me. You're so quiet. I know it's a shock. What are you thinking? When things were very bad, I could go away in my head to a place where no one could touch me. I went away to Butter's pasture, to galloping through the green fields on Butter. Ada, Susan said. She tapped my arm to bring me back. I took a deep breath. When do we go to the orphanage? What? Susan said. When do Jamie and I... Oh, God, please, please let me stay with Jamie. When do we go to the orphanage? Orphanage? Susan looked as shocked as if I'd slapped her. Ada, why on earth would you go to an orphanage? I glared at her. Where are we going then? Nowhere, Susan said. Nothing's changed. How could you possibly think it's your mother that's dead? I'm still here. You said you had to make arrangements. Funeral arrangements, Ada. I don't know what that means. Susan went perfectly still. Oh, she said. Oh, for heaven's sake, you poor dear. You must have been in agony. Why didn't you say something? You never wanted children, I said. You said so. She had over and over when we first came. And we aren't evacuees anymore. We're orphans. Lady Thornton's not in charge of us, and neither are you, and the orphanage won't let me keep Butter. Oh, Ada, Susan leaned forward and wrapped her arms around me. I tried to push her away, but she held tight. She was stronger than she looked. You misunderstood, she said gently. You are orphans, technically at least, but of course you're staying with me. In some ways, it's simpler now that your mother's dead. I shouldn't have any trouble becoming your legal guardian. When I said arrangements, I meant for your mother, for her remains. I didn't know what remains meant. I could guess, but I was afraid to. For her body, Susan said. Only that. You and Jamie stay with me. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I choked, and then I was sobbing, and Susan rocked me back and forth, as if I was a little baby, as if she loved me, as if she always had. And that is the end of chapter 3. And I think that Ada is finally going to be able to have a family, maybe, with Susan, and they're going to be able to move into a cottage on Lady Thornton's property. So tune in tomorrow night for chapter 4. Bye.